Welcome to Podcasting, Pandemics, and Teaching AP. So, who am I and why am I in this webinar? My name is Melanie Kingett, so welcome. I'm a teacher of AP Biology. You may have gotten this information from me directly, perhaps through social media or through one of our Facebook groups. I am a co-founder of the APsolute RecAP. We are a podcasting and educational resource company that provides free podcasts for students and teachers to support the content. I am joined by Sarah Rayder, who is our chemistry, and will introduce herself.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm Sarah Rayder. I am the author of the AP Chemistry podcast. I am teaching at a private school in Texas, Houston, Texas, and moving into my 5th year of AP teaching. I'm originally from Germany, as you might have been able to tell by my accent. So it's great that Melanie does the recording and I'll do the writing.
I'm actually from Connecticut originally, and I'm currently in Pennsylvania, but curious, where are all of you from? Have you started school yet? If you have, God bless, good luck, all the best. Some of us are still in the planning stages. So I have typed in the chat, and I do encourage you to use the chat to collaborate with each other. If you have a question during the webinar, please just type it into the chat. We will absolutely address it for you. If not at the start or in the moment, we'll do it at our Q&A at the end. So our webinar is going to have 3 parts. First, why podcasts? What are they? How are they useful? The second is going to be teaching strategies, and Sarah's going to give you a host of ways to integrate podcasts into instruction, whether you are remote learning or not. Just looking at the chat, we are from all over. Thank you for recognizing that this was Eastern time zone. We had a webinar last week, and that was one of the struggles. A few of us logged in late because of the time zone crossover, but wonderful to have you all here from all over, it looks like, the country. Great. All right, so we're going to start with why podcasts. And I know it might seem silly, but we have to start with what is a podcast. This is a review that was posted on our particular podcast page on iTunes. So here we have a student quoted as, I think it's a student, it's anonymous, but I think it's a student. It says, "This is a great way to review for the AP test. The content is presented in a way that is fun and easy to understand. It helped me to stress a little less about the test and feel more prepared. It's true, it's not about memorization, it's about understanding. Even if you're not planning on taking the AP test, it's a great review for the regular test as well." And I've actually heard that from a couple of teachers who have reached out to me about ways that they've used the podcast previously as not just AP review, but also other content areas. And we'll address that here too. So what is a podcast? In short, a podcast is an audio-only file. Most podcasts can be found in a plethora of resources. I have 3 of the most common at the top. We have Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and also Stitcher. Google Play is another one, as well as iHeartRadio. Apps for everything. A lot of these apps offer other features as well. Amazon actually just is teaming up with Audible, and they are launching podcasts too. So you can look for that as a resource in the next few weeks. But one thing that podcasts all have in common is that they are free. There are different levels of podcasts, and you can usually get premier features, but in and of themselves, much like YouTube, podcasts are free. And so that's a really great and easy tool to integrate into the classroom, and perhaps a tool not many of us have explored before. Most podcasts have very repeated formats, something that you can rely upon as a listener. If you like 1 or 2, you can have that format be consistent throughout the rest of your listening time. They might be interview format, perhaps it's a news format, a storytelling format. Our podcast has a format as well. And so I'm going to go over that in just a second. So our podcast, whether you've listened or not, and just curious, if you have listened to the podcast, maybe just pop into the chat. What have you listened to? Which subject? Because we have a few of them. Our podcasts have these 4 features to them. They're all about 10 minutes or less. The first is to let's zoom out. So put the information into context. Typically, that will be, where does this particular episode lie within the CED by unit, topic, and big idea, and a short introduction. The second, and this is the larger part, the meat and potatoes of the episode, is going to be let's zoom in, talking about the mnemonics, the examples, the skills, and the specific content that that episode is about. Our episodes always end with a recap, which is a very brief, short summary of the episode, typically 3 to 5 sentences. It's where we also reiterate key ideas and key vocabulary. And lastly, it ends with a question of the day. So of the day, it's more like a question of the episode, but we encourage questions that actually extend student understanding. So the answer to the question of the day is not actually in the episode itself. We want the students to start to think about what this connects to that they might know about. It's not always about getting it right or wrong, but sometimes just thinking, like, how does this apply to this new idea that's been extended? It might even be a fun fact or something cultural that maybe doesn't fit into the CED explicitly, but we always throw in those little nuggets of knowledge when we're teaching anyways. This is a good spot for that. We do provide the answer, so if you do use our episodes, don't expect them to necessarily have to come up with them off the top of their head. We post them to our social media accounts so that they can interact with other people as well. So this is our format. What are some advantages to using podcasts? We have our concept, regardless of what it is. Most of us are familiar with the two components on the bottom of this graphic, right? Our videos, our worksheets, they've been going hand in hand together for a while in education. And podcasts kind of fill in that other part of the circle. We know that educational pedagogy is changing constantly to the types of learners our students have. Regardless of the labels and regardless of what the recent articles have said, we know that providing diverse opportunities for students to experience content is going to have the most effective results. So audio and podcasts is perhaps one of those areas you haven't explored, but it does fit into these nicely. And it can be something that is included when either doing a worksheet or watching a video or after watching a video. And Sarah will talk about a few of those as well. So if we were ever looking for a time with no screen time, this is that time in education. You don't need to have your eyes open. It actually can allow for some imagination of these ideas and of these concepts. So a needed break. Second, they can come in really short pieces. And so student engagement can be very, very high. They can be binged consecutively without really losing stamina because they are so short. The last one is multitasking. I've unfortunately had quite an overshare with some of our listeners that have told me these are great. I'm getting ready for school in the morning and I'm listening to them while I'm in the shower, which is again an overshare, but exercising, doing the dishes, doing the laundry, getting the kids out of the house, yourself out of the house. If you're looking for a little recap before you have to prep for your class for the next day, it's also a really useful tool for that. But we are very busy. And so being able to multitask is crucial, and podcasts do provide that because you can get them on any device. When I first, this company, the APsolute RecAP, launched in February, and when we first launched, it kind of came out of this observation. My students have their headphones in their ears all the time. The moment they have an opportunity, when they're studying, they're always listening to something, when they're in the hallways, when they're walking into school, and it became, they want to listen to things. And how can I create something that they can use to help them become a better student? You don't need online access. I know I was very excited personally when Netflix allowed you to download their episodes in advance and you can use them on road trips. The same is true for podcasts. Advantage here being is that you can subscribe to them. They are automatically downloaded to your device when the new episodes are released. And this is true for any podcast that you listen to that releases episodes on a regular schedule. So they can be listened to directly through the computer. Sarah's going to talk about how you can integrate them into your particular educational platforms. But on the phone, easiest way, in your pocket whenever you need it. So we have 4 courses. Biology was our first podcast that launched at late February, about 3 weeks before the world shut down. We have 31,000 downloads and 45 episodes released. Chemistry launched 1 month ago, already has 8 episodes and has over 1,300 downloads. And we have government and music theory launching in September and a few more courses in the works. So we are continuously expanding because we've had such a positive response from students and teachers alike. But we are not the only ones out there. So I know in the AP Bio Facebook group, for example, just last week, someone asked a question: does anyone know good podcasts for current events? Because it's such a great way to have, the PCR testing alone with what's happening right now, such a great way to pique student interest. So these are just a few. If you know of a podcast that you really enjoy, maybe for yourself, something that you really like to listen to, you want to pop that in the chat and tell each other. I think we'd all appreciate it. But these are just some that have educational resources specifically that you might find useful, or one of your colleagues might find useful in the future. I wanted to talk about YouTube very briefly before we move on, as kind of a warning when you're looking for material. I think that anyone who teaches an AP course knows about Khan Academy. Some people love it. Some people find it as a great resource. It definitely has evolved as a platform in the last few years. Khan Academy has podcasts. However, they aren't podcasts. And by that, I mean, you can find them on a podcast platform, but they aren't written to be listened to solely. And so the same is true in reverse. You can find podcasts on YouTube, but they may not have the visual support for that particular design. So it'd just be something I'd be mindful of as you're looking for these types of resources, how they were initially intended to be used, and then find a niche for that within your teaching. But you'll find them on both places. All right, Sarah, tell us how to use them.
Thank you. Melanie, we do have a question in chat, AP Environmental Sciences, if you want to,
APES. I have a teacher currently that is very interested in working with us. And so we haven't made the commitment yet, but it's very possible that will happen this year. I wouldn't be surprised if you had APES, possibly AP Physics as well within the next few months. Because you're all here, I will tell you, we are going to be seeking some further collaboration in the very near future. So if you don't follow us on social media yet, it might be a good idea to do so that you can be the first to know.
All right. So I want to talk a bit about teaching strategies using the podcast in your classroom, outside of your classroom, and for learning and to support your students. Before we're going to get started, I want to give you a bit of a background of who we are in this podcast in this webinar, I should say, right now. Because we wanted later to go into the breakout rooms, we want you to get a bit of an idea what are the teaching situations that we are facing. And we did this when you signed up for our webinar today. We did ask you what is the format in which you will be teaching. And as you can see here, it's almost 80% that are indicating, or a bit more than 80% that are indicating that they are either doing distant or hybrid model. 9.4% are in person, and the 10% we assume that are teachers that did not know yet what their model will look like. Or if you have another model that's not one of those three, please feel free to put it in the chat. We would love to hear about other approaches to teaching for the upcoming school year. But as you can see in the survey, the teachers you will be in a breakout room will most likely either be in a hybrid setting or in a remote learning setting. So Melanie already said it. How can we make this podcast available to our students? We can very easily use the links that are being provided. If you just plug it into Google, you can use a link. You can obviously indicate for your students they can download it in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and whatever else they're using for their podcasts. However, you can also use our webpage. All our episodes are on the webpage, theabsoluterecap.com, and they're embedded together with transcripts on the webpage. So you can also just link the link to our webpage to the specific episode that you want them to listen to. And as you can see here on the bottom with the red arrow, you can even limit the time they are listening to. Let's say you see one of our podcasts and you only want to have 5 minutes out of it because there are some things that you might not have taught yet, so you don't necessarily want to assign the whole podcast. Then you can actually enter this here and you get a link that specifically is towards that piece of podcast that you've picked. And then just share this link with your students via Google Classroom or via your learning management system. On the right side, you can see here, that's actually from my learning management system, from my AP chemistry class. For the summer assignment, I assigned them 2 of our episodes and I embedded them. So I used the embedded code and I embedded them on our learning management system, and they can actually click play on the learning management system and they can just listen to it there.
Yeah, that's awesome, Sarah. One thing I forgot to say about Spotify is Spotify actually allows you to jump to time codes. So if you look at the description, and every episode has a brief description, you'll see time codes embedded. So you know how we're going to be doing a lot of pre-preparing for our classes and setting up for our classes. You don't have to prep the episode ahead of time necessarily, because you can actually just click the time code. It will auto jump to that spot for you. So if you just want to use like the question of the day as a bell ringer, you can just jump right to the question of the day, and that would just play for you as well.
So let's start with what I think most of you might be facing towards the beginning of the school year, and hopefully towards the end of the school year, we're transitioning out of that mode, but we'll see. Remote learning. Remote learning obviously is 2 different ways of doing it. Synchronous learning, where you are really engaging with your students at the same time, you're meeting with them on whatever platform you are using. And a way to use podcasts in that setting is you could have, for example, students listening to it within breakout rooms. Putting students into breakout rooms, giving them the link, having them listen to it, and then have them do a shared note-taking document. It can be our study guide that we are providing, or something else that you are coming up with, or some guided questions that you want them to use. And they can collaborate on the note-taking while listening to that podcast. They can extend it. Obviously, if you're using this as a review, and that was the original idea at least, then you can prompt them to go beyond what we are saying in that episode and put in some additional information from their notes, from the PowerPoints, from the materials that you provided them with. What I like doing is having then develop related questions. So once they use the podcast to review, now they can develop their own test questions, their own unit questions, their own AP style questions, if you want to call it that. And they can develop related questions. And when you're back in the main room, share those questions with others. Others can answer those questions relating back to the podcast and or the additional materials that they're using. So that is one way to use podcasts in a synchronous setting. And an asynchronous setting, so where you are not meeting with the student at the same time, but you are giving them materials to work on their own time. Students can, of course, listen individually on their own time to our podcast. They can fill out those study guides or other materials that you provide them with. What I like doing is kind of as a check that they listen to it, is doing check for understanding questions. So using a Google form with a couple of questions, and once they listen to it, once they did the study guide, they answer the questions on the Google form. And it's not as a big assessment. It is just a check for understanding and just a check for, did you really listen to this? And they can, of course, in both settings also use that to identify areas where they need review or they need help with, where they see like, oh, in 2 days is the chapter test and I don't know, I need help with, I still don't understand, and use that as a way to get some feedback where their own learning is.
Mm-hmm.
In the classroom or virtually. So we have a couple of ideas how we can use it, no matter if you are in a hybrid setting or in a remote learning setting, or if you are actually face-to-face with your students. One of the approaches to take are using the podcast as a method to differentiate between students and different types of learners. So assigning the podcast as well as the textbook pages, or in addition to the textbook pages, or have the students choose their way of learning and which method they prefer. The textbook, the podcast, what works for them. Using is similar to like a flipped classroom concept, where they listen to the podcast to cover the basics ahead of time. And that's something, for example, that I do with the introduction to chemistry ones. So we started chemistry with 8 episodes that are first year content episodes. And I will be assigning them now moving into AP chemistry prior to teaching the content on an AP level, so that they get like kind of a review from their first year. And then I can dive deeper during my class. In the classroom or even virtually in breakout rooms, you can use them for station rotation. You can have a station that is a technology station where they are listening to the podcast on their station, and again, either follow up with a work or research on a specific idea from the podcast, or are working together on extended question or guided questions, depending on the setup and the goal of your station work. Bell ringer. While we are faced with these new challenges, in a hybrid setting can also be a challenge that your students are filtering in. You might have to start a camera for the students that are staying at home. There's a lot of stuff going on. You take attendance. The first couple of minutes while teaching are often a bit on the low activity side for the students, because you have to do some of the housekeeping, of course. So why not use the podcast as a quick bell ringer? You don't have to do the whole 10 minutes or the whole 9 or 10 minutes. You can also do a part of it and really use it as either a way to look ahead, what is coming today, or to look back. What did we do yesterday? This is the content. So quick listen in, quick answer the question of the day or an extended question. And then while I'm taking attendance and setting up the Zoom students, now I'm ready to actually start and move forward. And then an idea is to actually use, and Melanie said it briefly, to actually use the podcast to, as a tool to visualization. So have the students listen to the podcast and draw their understanding. And that's a great opportunity to identify misconceptions. It's a great opportunity to understand or to get more understanding of what does it look like when they're visualizing those concepts. And for example, in chemistry, when we look at particulate diagrams and all these kind of things, does that really align with what it should look like? And use that as a good jumping off point for identifying misconceptions, and then obviously being able to work with those misconceptions moving forward.
Sarah, we got a good question in the chat. How likely are the answers to the worksheets to be found on the internet like the POGL answers are? Well, what do you so I think what you'll find about our particular worksheets is that, how likely is it? I think at some point they'll be up there. Most of our study guides, however, are student driven in terms of what they're writing. So they're more active note-taking guides with a small amount of direct question and answers. It's more intended for the students to write down what they know, write down what they're still struggling with, identify areas that they are trying to apply the knowledge. Do I think our study guides to be used graded? I think they could be completion. I don't know it personally, and this is everyone's particular preference. I don't know if the role of them is to ensure comprehension or if it's to practice. I mean, Sarah, what do you think about the answer keys?
I agree with you. I mean, looking at our study guides, to a certain degree, they have an openness to them. So even though we are providing a key, there is not necessarily this is the one and only answer to it. Like there is a blank, or not a blank, there's a box for them to kind of like summarize what they hear or what their understanding of, let's say, molar mass, because I just wrote the episode today. And that doesn't have to be word by word by word what's on the key. So in some instances, and parts of our study guides are on the one hand side individualized, on the other hand side, there is no just one answer.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I don't think, and it's not a really high stake. Usually.
Yeah. For example, one of mine is about drawing certain stages of meiosis, and there's 99 million diagrams of meiosis, but how the student chooses to draw it really should be independent to them, based upon what they identify as crossing over and their colors and things like that. There's a portion where I write the law of thermodynamics for them, and I say, please, rewrite this in your own words, find your own analogy. So I think that if you choose to use our study guides, you'll find them to be diverse from study guide to study guide, and also really for the students to develop in their own way of understanding.
While you're mentioning it, obviously we do ask you to not necessarily upload them on a publicly accessible webpage, because that defies the purpose, like it unfortunately does in many cases for the Pogo. So I want to talk a bit about what using for. So we talked a bit about how can we use them virtually, how can we use them in the classroom, how can we use them in a hybrid setting, but what can we use them for? So the idea when it started was as exam review. And we had students, I know they were like binge listening, which is now a word. We now had students binge listening to episodes while the exam was obviously coming up and using that as an exam review. We had students using it as a unit review. So right before a chapter or a unit test, on their way to school in the car, they would listen to a couple of the episodes as a unit review, as a preparation for the upcoming test. But there are a lot of other applications and uses that we can imagine for podcasts or for our podcasts. Project-based learning. So using the podcast, for example, as a starting off point for a stop motion project, where you are doing the visualization, again, for the podcast to identify misconceptions, to identify understanding, to have them actually really think about what the visualization has to look like, and then have them do for example, a stop motion project. So that could be the foundation and the basis of a more extended project that the students are doing. And I think these days we are all looking for alternative ways of assessment, and that might be one of them. They can be used as refreshers. In AP Chemistry, we have this weird split between Unit 6 and Unit 9 for a lot of reasons. But Unit 6 is thermodynamics and Unit 9 is applications of thermodynamics. So why not have them, before you start Unit 9, listen to our episodes from Unit 6 as a reminder, as a refresher, so that they know that content going into the applications of thermodynamics, as an example. Summer assignment, I already mentioned it for my students, using in my case, the Introduction to Chemistry video podcasts as a summer assignment, and reviewing, refreshing that first year of chemistry. They also work well, Melanie and I were discussing this, for AP Bio. Why not listen to atomic structure when you're going into AP Bio? Or why not listen to solution chemistry when you're going into AP Bio? They're not necessarily that chemistry heavy. It is really a foundational scientific concept, more so than it is like this prepares you only for AP Chemistry. Homework, of course, have them listen to it, fill the study guides, answer questions, prepare questions as homework. Throwback Thursdays, I don't know if anyone's doing that. I like to start that usually in the second semester, that I'm doing Throwback Thursday quizzes. So by the second semester, we are somewhere in Unit 6, hopefully. So I go back and I say, listen to the episodes of Unit 1, and there will be a quiz on Unit 1 because I want you to get started with your preparations for the exam earlier than 2 weeks in advance. Or emergency sub-planning. That was a discussion that came up on the AP Chemistry Facebook group. Then teachers needing emergency sub-plans for up to 2 weeks in case someone would not be able to prepare anything and wouldn't be able to come to school. So mixing your emergency sub-planning up with some podcasts, just a different form of instruction, just as a different form of reviewing, and just giving them a different medium. So they can also be used for that.
Yeah, and Sarah, you mentioned connected subjects, and I just do want to point out, so you can actually do searches on our website by keyword. It'll search the description as well as all of the titles. So if you do search the word atom, for example, you're going to get a bio episode and you're going to get a chem episode, as they are two different versions for that. We didn't want to be the only ones talking, and so it's very important to us that we have an opportunity to collaborate. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much. I know it was a brief collaboration, but I hope you found it useful to chat a bit with some of your colleagues. Like I said, we appreciate you entering some ideas. We'll be sharing all of that with the group so you can get that information. We wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you. This is and applaud you for trying something new. This is a very, very trying time in education, and being open-minded is a wonderful thing. We really appreciate your interest in what we do and in really integrating the podcasts into your instruction. If you haven't downloaded our free sample study guide, please feel free to do so. It's on our website, and you can get an idea for how they download, what the PDF fillable looks like, how to use it digitally, things like that. I did get one chat message that I thought I could address now, and that is copyrights. So podcasts are free, so you're welcome to use those as much as you want. Should you choose to use any of our copyright material, we do have education or fair use policies, so you're welcome to use them and make copies and post them to your classrooms digitally as well as in person. Obviously, please don't share them with another educator as they are a purchasable product with copyright, but please share them with your students. That's what they're intended for, is for you to use them. But otherwise, we thank you for coming on, and everyone have a great school year and best of luck. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, or if you successfully use a podcast in your classroom, we'd love to hear about it. Please follow us on Instagram at the APsolute RecAP. That's the APsolute RecAP. Check out our website, theapsoluterecap.com, for episode schedules, study guides, virtual tutoring, and to sign up for our virtual classroom. The APsolute RecAP is produced by Brad Kingett with music by Zach Caruso. AP is a registered trademark of the College Board. Copyright 2020, APsolute RecAP LLC, all rights reserved.